Have you ever wondered why sheer willpower almost never works? I mean, you set an alarm for 6 a.m. to go to the gym, you write down this incredibly strict diet plan, you swear up and down you'll stop checking your phone while working, and yet by Wednesday, you're right back to hitting snooze, eating a donut, and doom scrolling. Why do we constantly fail at breaking bad habits despite our absolute best intentions? Well, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are cracking open the brain to reveal the hidden mechanics behind your daily routines, and we're going to give you the exact neuroscience-backed blueprint to rewrite them. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is a pretty shocking statistic from researchers Wood, Quinn, and Kashi. They found that up to 45% of our daily behavior is entirely habitual. That means almost half of everything you do today, what you eat, how you respond to an email, even which shoe you tie first, is actually not a deliberate choice. It's just an automated response to a contextual cue, running completely in the background without your active consent. So, if 45% of your life is operating on autopilot, you really got to ask yourself, who is actually driving your body? Because if it isn't the conscious, goal-setting part of you, we desperately need to understand the hidden brain mechanics that are running the show. We really need to look under the hood. Section 1, Inside the Habit Brain. Let's look at the neuroscience of the autopilot. To really wrap our heads around this, we look to some groundbreaking MIT neuroscience led by Anne Graybiel. Her team essentially mapped the biological battlefield of our habits. They observed how the brain fundamentally changes its physical wiring as a brand new behavior transforms into a permanent, ironclad habit. Just picture the prefrontal cortex as this exhausted little stickman thinker. It's the part of your brain responsible for willpower, planning, and deliberate decision-making. But here's the catch. Using the prefrontal cortex is metabolically expensive. It burns a ton of energy. Then, on the flip side, we have the basal ganglia, which acts a lot like a highly efficient automated conveyor belt. As you repeat a behavior, your brain literally shifts neural control away from that exhausted stickman and hands it right over to the basal ganglia's conveyor belt. The technical term for this transfer of power is chunking. Honestly, your brain is incredibly lazy, but in the best way possible. It wants to save metabolic energy. So it takes a complex sequence of actions, like reversing your car out of the driveway, which used to take immense concentration when you first learned how to drive, and chunks it into one single automated unit stored right there in the basal ganglia. You no longer have to think, you just do. Section 2, Duhigg's habit loop, or the anatomy of a habit. So author Charles Duhigg translated this complex MIT neuroscience into a brilliantly practical framework in his book, The Power of Habit. He revealed that every single habit is driven by a three-part cycle known as the habit loop. Step 1 is the cue. That's an environmental trigger like a specific time of day, a location, or an emotional state. Step 2 is the routine. This is the actual behavior you perform, which runs totally automatically once that cue hits. And step 3 is the reward. This is the positive dopaminergic outcome that tells your brain, hey, this sequence is definitely worth repeating. This exact loop is how you train the basal ganglia. But Duhigg pointed out a fourth, often invisible element that makes habits so incredibly stubborn, and that is craving. As a habit solidifies over time, the cue doesn't just trigger the routine. It actually triggers an intense neurological craving for the reward before you even act. That craving is the real motivational engine. It's the exact mechanism that makes checking your phone or eating junk food feel almost compulsive, even when your prefrontal cortex is literally screaming at you to stop. Now, what's really fascinating here is what the brain activity looks like during all of this. When those MIT researchers watched rats run through a maze, they noticed that when a habit is fully formed, the basal ganglia actively spikes at the very beginning when it detects the cue, and it spikes again at the very end when it gets the reward. But during the routine itself, the brain essentially goes to sleep. The prefrontal cortex completely shuts down. You're literally functioning on autopilot during the behavior. Section 3, the golden rule. Charles Duhigg's framework for change. So if our brains are wired to go to sleep during the routine, how do we ever break a bad habit? Well, here is the harsh neurological truth. You can't just delete a bad habit. The neural pathway in the basal ganglia is already permanently built, but you can overwrite it. And this brings us to Charles Duhigg's ultimate framework for change, what he calls the golden rule of habit change. He states, to change a habit, keep the cue and the reward, but substitute a different routine. Because the cue and the craving are already hardwired, relying on sheer willpower to just suddenly stop doing something is completely a losing battle against your own brain chemistry. The logic here is beautifully simple once you map it out. Think about your old autopilot. You feel stressed, that's the cue.
You eat a donut, that's the routine. You get a dopamine hit of temporary relief, that is the reward. Now, to build a rewire loop, you have to acknowledge that stress cue and the genuine need for relief. But you swap out the routine on the basal ganglia's conveyor belt. You feel stressed, you take a 5-minute walk, and you achieve that exact same reward of temporary relief. Basically, you keep the bookends, but you change the middle.
All right, Section 4, hacking your habits and applying the neuroscience. Knowing the neuroscience is great, but how do we actually hack this system when we wake up tomorrow morning? Well, based on behavioral psychology and neuroscience, here is your daily toolkit. First, you've got to become an investigator of your own cues. Is it a time of day, a specific location, or an emotion that sets you off? Next, use implementation intentions. These are highly specific if-then plans. Research actually shows this can reduce task avoidance by up to 28%. Third, try Professor Catherine Milkman's strategy of temptation bundling. That's where you pair a low dopamine need, like doing the dishes, with a high dopamine want, like listening to your favorite explainer. And finally, disrupt your old context. Because habits are cued by your environment, just moving a chair or changing rooms can completely break an automatic loop. So, the crucial takeaway here is that you don't have to start from scratch. You can use habit stacking. The formula is super simple. After my current habit, I will do the habit I need. If you want to start meditating, don't just vaguely say, I'll meditate today. Say, after I pour my morning cup of coffee, a cue my basal ganglia already responds to automatically, I will immediately meditate for 1 minute. You are literally piggybacking the new routine onto an existing, deeply wired neurological cue. We've covered a ton of ground today, from the metabolically expensive prefrontal cortex to the automated basal ganglia, all the way to Duhigg's golden rule for hacking the habit loop. Now, the ball is entirely in your court. Look at your own life. What is one cue, routine, reward loop you will rewrite today? Find the cue, identify the craving, and choose a better routine. Your brain's autopilot is just waiting for its new instructions.